Steve's heart raced as he watched Adilah presenting her speech, standing across the room, effortlessly elegant and glowing with happiness. Her eyes sparkled with the same fire he remembered, but she looked different, more radiant, more complete. His heart clenched with jealousy, his mind spinning in disbelief. Adilah was supposed to be dead, or so he thought. What on earth is going on here? Steve asked himself. Steve knew that Adilah went missing after escaping from a mental institution, and no one had seen her since. But here she was, not only alive but thriving, married to a billionaire no less. The sight of her with that wealthy man sent a wave of envy coursing through Steve's veins. His ex-wife, the woman he had discarded, the woman he destroyed, was living the life he had always dreamed of. That night, Steve couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind replaying the image of Adilah, looking stunning and blissfully happy with her new life. It gnawed at him, a question burning in his soul. Was that really her? He needed answers, and he needed them now. By 3 a.m., unable to bear the torment any longer, Steve grabbed his car keys and sped off into the night, heading to the only person who might have some answers, Aunt Susan. She had been living in Adilah's parents' old house, taking care of it after they passed away. As Steve banged on her door, Aunt Susan, groggy and bewildered, opened it, her face lined with concern. "Steve, what on earth are you doing here at this hour?" she asked. "I saw her," Steve blurted out, his eyes wide with desperation. "Adilah, she's alive, and she's married to some billionaire named Bradley Cooper." Aunt Susan's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. "Alive? Adilah? That's impossible. We thought—" She stopped, her voice trembling. "But if she's alive, Steve, do you know what that means?" "What are you talking about?" Steve demanded, impatient and anxious. Aunt Susan sat down, her legs shaky, and motioned for Steve to do the same. "You see, Steve," she began, "Adilah had a child, a little girl, but it wasn't yours." Steve froze, his heart thudding in his chest. "What? What do you mean?" Aunt Susan took a deep breath. "Adilah was drugged and framed years ago. It was a horrible, malicious act. She ended up in Bradley Cooper's hotel room and, well, she became pregnant. When her parents found out, they were devastated, but they decided to give the baby, Natalie, to Bradley. He was the father. Then Adilah disappeared. We all thought she had died, but now—" Aunt Susan's voice broke. "She's back." Steve was speechless. He was the one who had drugged Adilah. He had spent years thinking he had ruined Adilah's life, but in reality, the very act that was supposed to destroy her had catapulted her into a new life of success and wealth. The irony was too much to bear. "Take me to her," Aunt Susan suddenly said, her voice filled with excitement. "If Adilah is alive, I need to see her. She needs to know about her parents' estate, everything that's rightfully hers." Numbly, Steve agreed. He got the address of Bradley Cooper's mansion and, together with Aunt Susan, drove through the quiet early morning streets. His stomach twisted with nervous anticipation, unsure of what he would find. When they arrived at the grand estate, Steve's heart raced as the imposing gates swung open. Mr. Cooper, dressed in an expensive robe, opened the door, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "We're sorry to intrude at such an hour," Aunt Susan began, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I'm Adilah's only living relative, and we've just learned she's alive. Please let me see her." Mr. Cooper hesitated, clearly caught off guard. He had been preparing for this moment ever since he had heard the truth about Adilah's past, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to handle it. He loved her deeply, and the thought of losing her, or the family they had built, terrified him. Mr. Cooper gently woke Adilah, her face a mask of confusion as she saw the visitors. "Aunt Susan?" Adilah's voice wavered as she descended the stairs, her steps hesitant. Her eyes locked onto Steve, and her expression turned to one of shock. Before Adilah could say anything, Aunt Susan rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Adilah, my child, you're alive!" she cried, holding Adilah's hands as if she needed to feel her to believe she was real. Oh, thank God you're alive. Adilah's eyes filled with tears, though confusion clouded her mind. I, I don't remember much, she whispered. Everything's so blurry. Aunt Susan nodded, her hands trembling. There's something you need to know. Natalie. She's your daughter, Adilah. Adilah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. She looked at Bradley, who was standing silently behind her, his face filled with emotion. The truth finally made sense. The deep connection she felt with Natalie from the moment they met wasn't just love, it was blood. Tears streamed down Adilah's face as she turned to Mr. Cooper, who didn't know whether to cry or be happy. I can't believe that we are truly a family. Mr. Cooper cried with joy. It was always meant to be. She turned back to Steve, who stood awkwardly by the door. I'm sorry, Adilah, Steve muttered, his voice barely audible. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until today. Please forgive me. I just want to make things right. Adilah looked at him, her expression unreadable. Steve, she said slowly, our paths have separated for a reason. You made your choices, and I've made mine. I'm happy now, and I'm not going back. As time passed, Adilah embraced her new life. She regained control of her parents' businesses and properties, finally stepping into the role she was always meant to have. And with Mr. Cooper and Natalie by her side, she found the happiness she had been searching for. When Mr. Cooper proposed to her, with a quiet sincerity that left no room for doubt, Adilah said yes, not because of the life he could provide her, but because he had become her heart, her home. They married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by the people who mattered most. A few years later, they welcomed their second child, a boy they named Bradley Jr., and their family felt complete. Steve, on the other hand, lost everything. Fired from the company he once controlled and abandoned by the very greed that had consumed him, he was left to rebuild his life from the ashes of his own making. The moral of the story is, sometimes the plans we make to harm others end up backfiring on ourselves. Life has a way of turning even the darkest moments into opportunities for growth, love, and redemption. Forgiveness and letting go of the past are the true paths to peace, while holding on to envy and bitterness only leads to self-destruction. What is meant to be, will be.